Well, good afternoon to you. It's 3:06 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up today at 3:30, we're joined by Rebekah Koffler, an expert on Vladimir Putin. We'll talk to her about being on the cusp of World War III thanks to Joseph Robinette Biden. What are they up to as the lame duck president pushes things into even more chaos? Michael Knowles is here with us at 4 o'clock today as a congressman attempts to use the Congresswomen's room in Congress. What is going on? Michael Knowles reacts to that. Jason Miyares, the current Attorney General and perhaps future Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Virginia, here at 5 o'clock today, just announced his reelection campaign. And Brian Kavanaugh at 5:30 from the Heritage Foundation reacts to that testimony from FEMA today about why it was skipping over the homes of Trump supporters in the wake of those devastating hurricanes. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. President Donald Trump just announced about a half an hour ago that he is headed to the great state of Texas today to watch the launch of the largest object ever to be elevated not only to space, but simply by lifting off the ground. He writes, good luck to Elon Musk and the great patriots involved in this incredible project. Yeah, that's the SpaceX Starship Flight 6 is set to take place this afternoon. And it's pretty cool. This is, we saw the chopsticks catch that booster as it came back to Earth that Elon Musk was so proud of, and rightfully so. Such a breakthrough in rocket technology. President Trump hasn't stopped raving about it. It's the second most important thing to him behind his own presidential campaign. He keeps telling everybody about the chopsticks catching this rocket as it came back to Earth. He's so impressed by it. And today he's headed off to watch that Starship launch in Texas. Space.com, which is a perfectly good website for space news, tells us that today's Starship launch will attempt to perform a boost back and chopstick arm catch of the super heavy booster. The Starship upper stage has new objectives not included in its last flight, including, quote, reigniting a Starship Raptor engine while in space and testing a suite of heat shield experiments and maneuvering changes for ship reentry and descent over the Indian Ocean. Super Heavy and Starship were separately transported to the pad at SpaceX's Starbase facility in southern Texas last week, where the two were stacked in preparation for today's launch. Combined, the integrated Starship rocket stands nearly 400 feet tall. That's 122 meters. Think about this. This is all going to be up in the air with a diameter of 30 feet diameter. That's 9 meters. Once in operation, it's expected that Starship will be capable of lifting payloads of up to 100 tons into low Earth orbit and transporting crews to the surface of the moon and Mars. So today, more history being made as Elon Musk and company set to throw one of these rockets into the air. You know what's really funny about Elon? There's a lot of stuff that's amusing about Elon. But did you see that he shares videos of himself playing video games on the internet? You ever see this? He plays a video game called Diablo, which has existed for decades, but in its current iteration, he's been playing it a lot lately. And he was bragging to Joe Rogan recently. I don't know if bragging's the right term. It just came across as so matter-of-fact. He's like, yeah, I'm one of the top 20 players in the world. You're one of the top 20 players in the world at a video game? One of the most popular video games on the planet. It's called Diablo. You're one of the best players on the planet at a video game? Yeah. And if you go, you can look it up. But you can see in the rankings, he doesn't even have, the company, I guess, has not, they don't put a screen name up for Elon Musk. They just put Elon Musk. Elon Musk is in the top 20. I think there's only 2 Americans in the top 20. So the question, of course, immediately becomes, how in the world do you have time to join the top 20 of any video game on the planet? Unless there were 20 players in it total, how do you join the top 20 rank? How is that even possible? And it's just the way he is. This is who he is. He can have a company like SpaceX where he's launching unseen projects into the air and then catching them as they come back down with chopstick arms. Or he's pioneering Neuralink, a computer technology that can help people with immense conditions connecting to their brain and helping their circuitry. or Tesla or any of these companies, or Starlink. Starlink, the ability to bring internet to anywhere on the planet by just directing a satellite to it. This guy is from another planet. I don't even know how he does that. But the funny thing is, if you watch the videos of him playing video games, he's just streaming his own footage and he's running around. I can't even imagine like how he does all this. Just like there's like all sorts of knives and magic spells flying everywhere. He's killing all the bad guys. And you can hear his voice. It sounds like he's barely paying attention to the game because in the background, in one of the videos that he released, it was a teleconference with all of the engineers at SpaceX. They were just talking about this week's issues and what they were dealing with various rocket technology. And he's like, yeah. And then he's asking insightful questions. He's barely paying attention to these people. He's playing Diablo, having a full-blown conference on how to get rockets up into the air and then to catch them as they come back to Earth. This guy is on another planet. Now, so insofar as he's a role model to our children, don't tell them that he's also playing video games at the same time that he's doing all of this other stuff. Most people are not Elon Musk. Most people can't do that. And in fact, men in particular don't have the multitasking capability. Most of us are singularly focused. I'm focused on this one thing right now. I plan on doing it as well as I possibly can. Everything else falls by the wayside, at least for the moment. Amazing. So anyway, President Trump off to see that today. To be there, to be present for that. And that is the kind of thing that I wish we could all dwell on more, right? Because in a world full of all of the misery that we've been served by our institutions, by our pathetic, mediocre, corrupt institutions who are looking to sort of like wring you dry of every last dollar you have, exploit you for their own benefit. And then if you're not good enough to exploit, they'll exploit foreign nationals that they bring in illegally. Kind of sick of that system, actually. It's really depressing. It isn't uplifting. It doesn't make me feel good about the state of the country. But when you see an entrepreneur who can gather together Americans to achieve great American things and create great American jobs, well, that fills you with a sense of optimism and achievement, doesn't it? And so I'm grateful that in addition to all of the other things Elon Musk is up to, which I just named a bunch and haven't even come close to scratching the surface of all of the other for-profit enterprises he's engaged in, I am grateful that he's engaging in the Department of Government Efficiency as well. So he's taking these talents that he has, which we saw manifest themselves in, did I mention X? Did I mention the biggest free speech platform on the planet? No, I didn't. Yeah, that seems important, doesn't it? Or did I mention his voter registration drives ahead of the election, his open support for President Trump in a world where no billionaire is really allowed to say out loud that they support the Republican candidate for office? Look, I'm not going to change my concern about like everyone and the influences that they have coming at them. I remain concerned about the role that the influence that China will attempt to wield over Elon and his supply chain's dependency on some of the elements from China, some of the pieces there. That's fine. And in America, we're allowed to raise those concerns, have that conversation, and encourage people to be even better. That's fine. I mean, we're all some of us are guilty in some similar ways at a much smaller scale. I'm holding an iPhone in my hand. I don't know what kind of Chinese slave labor went into producing this product, but again, this is what I've got. So we've all got shortcomings and hypocrisies. But I'm encouraged by him. I like it. I've felt this way for a while. I've heard a lot of people say the same. They kind of see him as like a Thomas Edison of our era, just a guy who seems to be overflowing with world-changing ideas. And I'm really grateful he's on our side. I'm grateful he immigrated here. I'm grateful he became an American citizen. I love that. And so he's achieving something, and President Trump is elevating that. He's grateful to his role in the campaign, and he's reminding Americans that that's the kind of attitude we all need to succeed and to thrive and to make this country, what was the phrase? Great again. Achievement. The space race. Think about the space race. Just the idea that, the United States is the first to put a man on the moon, the unifying patriotic sentiment that delivered to the United States of America, that Americans could feel They had achieved something, a space race against the Soviets, after having watched Sputnik drift past and being like, whoa, we've got a challenge on our hands. This is a real fight. So that's where we are. So President Trump going to encourage that today. I'm very pumped about that. Meanwhile, what's the old president doing? What's Biden up to? Well, Biden seems to be, in his waning days, and look, I realize as I talk about Biden, this continues to be true today as it was over these past few years. Biden or whoever's controlling him, let's be honest, the man is not in a mental state to reasonably lead anything. The guy couldn't lead a tour group, nevertheless, the entire country. Could you imagine what that would be like? You know, you get off your cruise ship and he's your tour guide for your excursion. There's no chance it goes well. I mean, you'd have a lot of stories to tell about the tour guide, but there's no chance that excursion looks anything like it did in the pamphlet. You know, when you're like, I swear we were supposed to be snorkeling at this point. And, you know, meanwhile, like, you know, you've lost like half the group or something. Yeah. Biden, in his limited mental capacity, being led around by slime balls like Tony Blinken and others, is using the closing days of his administration to drive the world even closer to the brink of World War III. That's where we are today. So when you get a major election like we just experienced, one where the foreign policy differences are as stark as you can possibly imagine between the Democrats' hand-selected candidate, now Kamala Harris, but earlier Joe Biden, and Donald Trump, don't you think that in a real country that you would have some respect for the will of the voters? In other words, the Biden administration right now should be thinking, we can't screw this up for the incoming administration. The American people have spoken clearly about what they want. And what they want is a resolution to these wars. They'd like for the bloodshed to stop. They have lost the appetite, if they ever had it at all, to send money to one of the most corrupt countries on the planet without any mission laid out to the American people as to why we're doing that, at the cost of over 1 million lives from both sides of that conflict, with no end in sight. And meanwhile, we are plagued with domestic issues and a confused American public that's asking, why are you exacerbating that quagmire instead of helping the American citizen who desperately needs it right here? So breaking overnight, not only did Joe Biden authorize, all of a sudden, long-range missile strikes into Russia by Ukraine using U.S. long-range missile systems, but Ukraine began to fire those missiles now with Biden's blessing or Blinken's blessing or whoever it is who's conveying this information to Ukraine. That's where we are. Army tactical missile systems. Ukraine has begun using them, going deep into Russia now. The Ministry of Defense in Moscow reported the incoming missiles this morning. They said that 5 missiles were shot down, 1 was damaged, fragments causing a fire at a military facility in the region. According to CBS, Russian officials say that this decision could lead to world war. And of course, they would say something like this. They want to stop the attacks. But the question then becomes like, well, what is the likeliness that that's true? How close are we to something like that? Well, CBS reported while there was no immediate reaction directly from the man who launched the nearly 3-year war on his neighboring nation, they're referring to Vladimir Putin, lawmakers aligned with President Vladimir Putin in Russia said Monday that the move was unacceptable, and they warned it could lead to a third world war. This is how Russia's talking now. Additionally, this week, today, President Vladimir Putin today lowered Russia's threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. The New York Times describes this as a long-planned move, whose timing appeared designed to show the Kremlin could respond aggressively to Ukrainian strikes on Russian territory with American long-range missiles. The new doctrine in Russia asserts that Russia could use nuclear arms in the event of an attack by a nation that is backed by a nuclear power. Well, I mean, that's a lot of words to say that Russia is declaring that it believes that they are justified in using nuclear weapons now that Ukraine is striking them deep with American missiles deep inside Russian territory. The doctrine's publication on Tuesday, the Times says, appeared to be the latest suggestion from the Kremlin that Russia could use nuclear weapons to respond to attacks by Ukraine carried out with American support, and that the response could be directed against American facilities as well as Ukraine itself. Do you trust Joe Biden and Tony Blinken to handle all of this? Do you trust them to do this? Do you trust Lloyd Austin? Do you trust any of these goons? Well, if you just look at the election results, the answer to that is no, you don't. And I'm not just talking about the people that are in this audience. I mean, the American people do not trust these guys to navigate one of the most difficult and sensitive situations on the planet. One that could blow even more out of control at a moment's notice. And spurred along by Joe Biden and company. The last thing we need them doing is coming up with bold new plans on how to deal with this conflict. Settle down, son. Settle down. We voted your regime out. You just hold tight. Donald Trump's coming into office soon, and let him take over from here. The American people just sent a really clear message about that. We're going to talk to Rebekah Koffler coming up in just moments about this very issue. She's been studying it her whole life, and she'll have important thoughts. All right, let's go to the phones. I got Dan calling in from Reston, line 2. Hello, Dan. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince. Thanks for taking my call. So when I look at this and I listen to what Biden is doing in allowing Ukraine to attack deeper into Russia, this is not like prying the W's off a keyboard before the next administration comes in. This is potentially, threatening to us all. Where are the Republicans in stating that, how Biden can be president, but he's not fit to run for president?
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's insanity. They didn't charge him because he lacked the mental capacity to stand trial. He shouldn't be president of the United States today at all. And he's on the verge of plunging us into world war. You're totally right about that. And also, there's some deeper, more corrupt problems here that I'm sensing, which is that you're looking at the convulsion of the deep state right now. As President Trump is promising to gut it, they're fighting back by plunging the world into something much more awful in order to justify their very existence. I'm concerned about this. We're going to talk to Rebekah Koffler coming up next. She's got a lot to say on the issue. Well, good afternoon to you. 3:35 here at News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up, 4 o'clock, Michael Knowles stops by the program. We will talk about a new congressman arriving soon who wants to use the ladies' room. The women of Congress are saying, not so fast. Michael Knowles weighs in on that culture debate. Jason Miyares, the current Attorney General and perhaps future Attorney General of Virginia, will be with us at 5 o'clock to talk about his campaign for re-election. And Brian Kavanaugh with the Heritage Foundation joins us at 5:30. He's a former FEMA official who responded to that big FEMA hearing on the Hill today. What is this music? I feel like I should have roller skates on. Good to have you with us. 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. You can join us. Yeah. I'm all pumped up. Although I am concerned. I'm concerned about World War III. I'd like to avoid that if possible. Don't you think? Wouldn't that be fun? Avoiding World War III? And why is Washington so eager to get us into World War III just before President Trump arrives in the Oval Office? I'm tugging on my chin as I think about this. For more on this subject, I want to bring in Rebekah Koffler now. She is a former Defense Intelligence Agency officer and the author of Putin's Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America. Rebekah, good to have you back with us.
Thank you for having me, Vince.
All right, so this week, a couple of big developments when it comes to the United States, Ukraine, and Russia. President Biden begins authorizing the use yesterday of long-range American missile strikes done by Ukraine into Russia's mainland. And then overnight, Ukraine took Biden up on the offer, began firing these missiles. And then Russia is now saying that this could lead to a third world war in the very same day where Vladimir Putin has just lowered Russia's threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. What am I to make of this, Rebekah Koffler?
Well, we're in a very, very dangerous situation, Vince. We actually wargamed this back in the intelligence community dozens and dozens of times. This is exactly how the United States gets dragged into war with nuclear Russia, which has the world's largest nuclear arsenal. And typically the crisis escalates out of what the Russians call a local war, such as the one in Ukraine, dragging in the U.S. And the reason why the Russians are interpreting Biden's insane decision to authorize Ukraine to use the U.S. long-range missiles to strike deep inside Russia. They interpret it as an act of war because those attackers, they don't fire by themselves, even though the Ukrainian soldiers technically could push the button. All of the targeting of the weapon, the software program to make sure that the missile flies in the right trajectory, that requires U.S. personnel and U.S. satellites. And so what the Russians are saying is that U.S. now is officially the party to this war, and we are now on the target list.
So I'm trying to, let's begin with like the best case scenario for a moment. Rebekah, what is this supposed to accomplish? Is the idea that if Ukraine gets to fire American missiles into Russia, that Russia will abandon Ukrainian territory entirely, wave the flag, and say, okay, we're done? Is that what they think is going to happen?
So I am an intelligence analyst who is able to penetrate Putin's mindset. That's my expertise in Russian warfighting strategy.
Yeah.
I have no clue what Biden's rationale is. I mean, there are various theories why he did what he did. It truly sounds insane because Biden himself just recently explained to his DNC donors at the fundraising event is the reason why he was trickling down weapons to Ukraine rather than providing them in mass numbers to actually make a game-changing difference on the battlefield is because the threat of nuclear Armageddon was real, and because he did not want to get the United States into World War III. Those are his words. So he is now doing exactly that. He's walking us into World War III. And so I'm struggling to interpret this deranged behavior. Is he doing it on purpose? I heard some, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, right? But I'm just going to go ahead and say it because the difference lately between the conspiracy theory and a fact is a couple of months, whether it's the Hunter Biden laptop or COVID, right? So
or like Putin blew up the Nord Stream pipeline.
There's a hypothesis that Biden is trying to remain in power by getting into nuclear war with Russia so he can declare a national emergency so that he can prevent President Trump from ever entering office.
Huh.
And look at what they've done to Trump already. I mean, they were hell-bent on preventing another Trump's presidency. They concocted the Trump-Russia collusion. They've staged, orchestrated impeachments, various impeachments, to the point where there have been 2 assassination attempts on Donald Trump.
Yes.
I mean, just think about that. So I'm kind of scratching my head here, and where is this going? Because it makes no sense.
I mean, insofar as we're reading their corrupt intent, one scenario that I do think is very likely is that you've got an entrenched bureaucracy and a defense industrial complex that doesn't want the gravy train to end and doesn't want to lose power. And if we are forced into a world war, that changes the calculus a bit and entrenches some of those powers for the long term, or at least that might be the thinking. Because President Trump has made it really clear as he comes in, Rebekah Koffler, that he wants to take a meat cleaver to a lot of these agencies, to trim them down, to right-size them, to make them more focused on doing the business of the American people, to make them more efficient. And I think there's a lot of people in Washington who desperately don't want to see that happen.
I agree with you. It makes logical sense what you're saying. Yes, the gravy train would end, right? We have already provided to Ukraine close to $200 billion of U.S. taxpayers' money, and it haven't done a damn thing to, in terms of changing the trajectory and the outcome of this war. But think about it this way. I mean, that would be completely reckless if the deep state and the military-industrial complex were indeed pursuing this goal, because the U.S. intelligence agencies themselves gave Biden their warning as recently as September that if he did indeed provide authorization to Zelensky to strike deep inside Russia using U.S. weaponry, then Putin, and I quote, would launch attacks, including lethal attacks, on Europe and the United States. And I completely agree with this assessment. This has been a standing analytic line in the intelligence community. I served during the Obama administration. I personally briefed Obama's National Security Council, NATO, so everyone is aware of it. So this means, if you are correct, Vince, that means that these people are knowingly dragging us into World War III, because remember, it's not going to stay at Russia, Ukraine, and the United States, because remember, the North Koreans are now fighting on Russia's side.
Yes.
China will likely join them. Iran. So it's definitely going to be a World War III.
Oh, so let's assess this nuclear doctrine for a moment. So I was just quoting from the New York Times coverage of this. They indicated today that Vladimir Putin has lowered Russia's threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. The new doctrine asserts that Russia could use nuclear arms in the event of an attack by a nation that is backed by a nuclear power. The doctrine's publication on Tuesday, that's today, appeared to be the latest suggestion from the Kremlin that Russia could use nuclear weapons to respond to attacks by Ukraine carried out with American support, and that the response could be directed against American facilities as well as Ukraine itself. So if I'm reading this correctly, Rebekah Koffler, what that's suggesting is that Russia now believes, as of this moment, nuclear attacks on American facilities are in bounds for them.
So, okay, let's just unpack this. Yes, Putin did approve the updates to the nuclear doctrine, right? It allowed, he lowered the threshold. It's not likely to just recklessly attack the United States with nukes, right? There's a much more gradual, what we call escalation ladder. He would start more likely with destructive cyber attacks on U.S. critical infrastructure. And those are going to be more destructive than regular kind of baseline cyber intrusions that they already do. And the Russians can do a lot of damage to the United States without crossing the nuclear threshold, right? With cyber warfare, space warfare types of attacks. But if everything else fails, then yes, there is such a plan called escalate to de-escalate, whereby we are also on the target list, not only for regular kinetic attacks, but in terms of nuclear as well.
Well, one would assume that they would start, as you point out, as escalatory. If they're going to target Americans, they wouldn't target the American mainland with a nuclear strike. I'm talking about Americans who are in the region. Americans would be killed in a nuclear strike. That would set off, I think, a chain of very destructive events, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I misunderstood. Yes. On the battlefield, absolutely. Because remember, to operate these attackums,
yes,
it requires U.S. personnel and U.S. satellites. So, from Russian standpoint, those are legitimate targets. So we can have our, sons and daughters burn in Russia's nuclear furnace.
So
that's what these people are doing.
Let me explore what's possible here. Obviously, President Trump has won the election, and not only the United States but the world is awaiting his arrival on January 20th. does that mitigate the risk from Vladimir Putin at all? Meaning, is Putin does Putin have any expectation that President Trump arriving could mean a conclusion to the events that are going on between Russia and Ukraine right now?
Putin did have that expectation until Biden's latest deranged move, right? Putin was happy to end this conflict, right, on certain terms, and Trump would have gotten the best deal for Ukraine than anyone could, because the Russians Putin fears President Trump because the Russian intelligence services have profiled him as unpredictable, right, as opposed to Kamala Harris, whom they profiled as vapid, incompetent, and unintelligent. So that now that Biden has done this, it destroyed Putin's peace plan. Why? It's because Putin is not going to trust Trump.
Yes.
Why is that? The Russians are absolutely suspicious of the United States to begin with, because the U.S. policy has not changed for half a century, pretty much, regardless whether it's a Democrat or Republican has been in the White House.
Right.
Washington has pursued the policy of democratization of former Soviet states, such as Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, which the Russians consider it as their Monroe Doctrine. They relied on this state as part of their strategic security program.
In other words, we're bringing those countries into our sphere of influence. They're considered Americanized and loyal to us.
Exactly. And once you do that, if they become part of NATO, NATO U.S. military hardware gets deployed to those places.
Right.
And Putin just can't possibly accept that level of risk, because the flight time of a missile is so short that for Putin Putin believes that there's no reaction time. Just similarly as like if the Chinese decided, or Iranians, to get as close as Canada or Mexico, we wouldn't allow that, right?
Well, actually, technically, we are allowing that, because the Chinese have taken over the cartels in Mexico, and they're killing over 100,000 Americans a year. But yeah, a normal country wouldn't allow that. You're right about that.
A normal country wouldn't allow that. And that's why Putin right now does not trust whatever Trump is going to bring to the negotiating table.
Yes.
Putin is just going to be concerned that either we're bluffing or we're deceiving them. And he's going to proceed destroying Ukraine regardless. Yes, he will pretend that he's going to negotiate with Trump because he likes to be viewed as, somebody
as a statesman,
loves peace, right?
Yeah, I got
it. Statesman, and but he's going to drag his feet, and in the meantime, he's going to proceed destroying Ukraine so that Ukrainians throw out Zelensky out of power. The way that we instigated that in Iraq, right? Saddam Hussein died at the hands of its own people. Muammar Gaddafi. Those things had a very deep psychological impact on Putin. He wants to do the same to Zelensky, and that's why the Russians have destroyed already 50% of Ukrainian critical infrastructure. They're trying to plunge them into darkness and freeze Ukrainians as winter is coming, so that they throw out Zelensky, who's already illegitimate at this point because his term expired back in March.
Okay. Lastly, and thank you as always, Rebekah Koffler, in your assessment of Vladimir Putin and how he operates psychologically, I've been wondering your answer to this question. Recently, he was quoted as saying that when President Trump was shot on July 13th, Vladimir Putin interpreted the events of that day as impressive in terms of Trump's reaction. He referred to him as manly, that he had a manly reaction. In your view, is that just a psyop to suck up to Trump, or do you think that represented a real and important psychological assessment that would maybe help Trump as he deals with Putin?
So it's actually both, Vince. Yes, Putin was genuinely impressed because manliness is valued highly in Russia. and it is expressed differently culturally, in Russia and in the United States. This is exactly why you see Putin parading, bare-chested and wrestling bears and stuff like that. The Russians love it. But he genuinely was impressed. But it is also at the same time to express his respect and kind of butter up to Trump, because he has to work with him. And Putin is actually rational in a sense that in the Russian sense of rationality and common sense, he's rational, he can be dealt with on a transactional basis. And Putin actually did not rush approving this the lowering of the nuclear threshold, because just as recently when the reports surfaced that Biden gave approval to Zelensky to strike deep inside Russia, the first reaction of Dmitry Peskov was hypothetical, right? What Peskov said, which is who is Putin's spokesperson, said if such decision was indeed formulated and Kiev regime was made aware of it, then it would constitute a qualitatively different round of escalation in terms of the U.S. involvement in this conflict, right? And then they waited. They didn't overreact, and that is because they don't want to go to into war with the United States. They know it's going to blow up as World War III, and so they waited until the missiles actually started flying.
Yes.
And they even the Russian media even talked about how the Washington Post reported that Trump and Putin spoke. Well, such thing never happened. They said a lot of the time Western media either, runs disinformation. We don't trust them. He said the Biden administration never acknowledged that they gave that decision.
Okay.
So they waited until the missiles actually struck the Bryansk region, hitting military airbase.
Yes.
Unfortunately, 5 missiles were intercepted by Russian missile defenses. The third one, the debris landed on the military base.
Okay,
So
all right, Rebekah, we got to run.
Judicious.
This is all very good information, though. We're always so grateful for your time. Rebekah Koffler, the author of Putin's Playbook. Thank you, as always. Great to talk to you today.